Okay, people are still trickling in, but I will turn it over to Tom and Sarah. They can give their introductions and get us started.
Okay. All right. Let me jump in and start by introducing myself. Hopefully we're getting some repeat attendees, people that have begun to attend our other webinars. So hopefully I look a little bit familiar to some on the call, and welcome to all the new people. But my name is Tom Diliberti, and my role with Energy Cap is I'm the Senior Manager of Energy and Utility Solutions. In a brief professional history, I have been in the energy industry for 20 years. I actually come out of the classroom. I was a high school teacher, so I left that role and became an energy manager for a large school district. And after doing the energy manager role for a few years and going through a lot of this alphabet soup and learning a lot of these acronyms, I ended up playing a consultant role for boy 15 years on the road, helping organizations save energy and save money. And so I'm really passionate about this and anxious to share some of the content today because I think we can have some fun with it. Sarah, what about you? What's your background?
Yeah, ostensibly I go second because I do the next slide, but really it's so Tom can go first because we all know that everyone is mostly here to see Tom because he is so beloved and he's so wonderful and does a whole lot of these things for Energy Cap. So very thrilled and honored to be talking with him today about this subject. I'm Sarah Uranowski. I head up all things product marketing for Energy Cap, and I'm a 15-year veteran of the energy industry, end to end. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I started in energy production and nuclear all the way through distribution with utilities, and now on the building and energy management side with customers and building owners and end users. And like Tom, I've run into a lot of these acronyms over the years. I'm excited because we have some fun things to show you. And with that, let's get started. And of course, as Mad said, please feel free to use the chat, ask questions as we go. We can try to answer as we go, but also we always save time at the end for questions as well. So keep the responses coming.
Yeah, so Sarah, I think it comes to me. If you're following me on LinkedIn or have seen my post on LinkedIn, I teased that there was going to be a quiz in this webinar, and we're kicking off with that quiz right here. So we thought we'd have some fun out of the gates here, where we have 10 random acronyms that are on the screen right now. Wanted to give you a chance to digest them. They probably come from different areas, maybe some HVAC, maybe some financial, maybe some sustainability, but was curious to see just out of the box how many people knew what these acronyms are. And it's one thing to maybe know what the letters stand for, but then maybe having a context is going to be helpful as well. So run through the list, see if you can put some words with the acronyms. So we'll give you another minute or so, and then what we're going to do is give you the answers, and we want some feedback to find out how many of these random acronyms you knew without much of an explanation. So if we're ready to unveil the answers, let's toggle to the next slide. And these are the answers. So think about it, take a look at your score, be honest with us here. We'd like some honest feedback in terms of how many of these you knew out of the box, and also we'll set the stage for as we move forward. So if you could respond to the poll, and we're curious to find out the attendees for today's webinar, what background you bring.
It looks like we've got a lot of folks still learning, which is totally okay. And that's exactly what we're doing here today.
So I'm actually not seeing the results. I don't know if others are not seeing the
Oh,
results
Tom.
either.
That's right. We had a tech thing. We had to bring Tom in as a speaker. So I'm going to end the poll, but the results are 70%, 71% of folks are still learning. They were in the 1 to 3 answers with
Okay,
23% in the 4 to 7 and the rest in 8 to 10. So most folks are still learning, which is great. That's exactly why we're here.
awesome. That's great information. So I think the next one's me. So if we close the poll and move to the next slide, please. Let me give you a sense for the format of, actually, Sarah, it's back to you. I forgot about this slide here. If you could cover this one, I think we planned.
Absolutely happy to. So before we talk about acronyms, and we're going to talk about all the acronyms that you just saw and a couple more, I want to talk about teams and I want to talk about people because the same data and even the same acronym, like if you talk about an ROI or a KPI, those things can mean very different things depending on the team or the person that you're talking to because their jobs, their priorities, their success metrics, those things can be very different from one another. So I like to start off this kind of conversation with a little bit of a cheat sheet about who's in the room and what they're really trying to solve for. So for finance folks, right, finance are going to own the budgets, the forecasts, accruals, month-end closing, all of those things that, especially when you're talking about utility and energy bills, are kind of the big line items that need to be explained. And finance folks in general are going to care a lot about accuracy, about control, about audit trails, having good solid data and why there are variances and they're looking for cost and control there. Executive leadership is going to have a very different take on things, right? So they're not so much in the weeds. They're setting a strategic direction, they're allocating resources across your organization, and ultimately they're the ones that own the outcomes, right? And the results at a higher level. So they're looking for the headline. If finance is looking for some of that mathematical detail, executives are looking much higher up for what is the impact on not only cost, but risk, resilience, our priorities, what our board and our stakeholders are looking for from us. They're looking for the short version of things. So what's happening? Why does it matter both to our org, but also to our business? And what decisions do you need from me as a result of that? Energy management, also a different take, right? They are the ones, especially when we're talking about utility data, they're living closest to that data. So they are monitoring and analyzing that data day in, day out, minute in, minute out to raise risks, to find waste, help with compliance, efficiency opportunities, things like that. Sustainability is definitely lumped in here as well. And they need to translate that building data, or I'm sorry, that billing data into realities for buildings and learn and understand, okay, what projects, what programs, what kind of reporting do we need all of this to filter out into? And they're spending a lot of time answering ad hoc questions from other folks. And then facilities, Tom, you're much better at facilities than I am, but Tom always says safety and comfort. And that's exactly right when you're talking about facilities. They're talking about keeping buildings safe, running, warm, healthy, and they're worried about metrics like uptime and maintenance and getting inspections done for compliance purposes, those kinds of things. A very different language, right, than some of the other folks. And they're managing operating and capital priorities. We're going to talk about OPEX and CAPEX, but basically they want to focus on the scope of those projects and how much they're disrupting the use and function of those buildings. So they are often getting kind of the problems without a lot of that additional context. So it's important to understand a little bit of this and the teams that we're talking about before we talk about the language that they use. So Tom, did I miss anything or anything to add?
No, Sarah, I think you did a great job summarizing. And I, the theme here, as Sarah is saying, is that because each of our teams are focused on distinctly different things, the only way we can connect is by sharing a common language. And when we walk into meetings and we start throwing around acronyms, we can't assume that everybody else in the meeting really knows what you're talking about. And I want to highlight my experience. I mentioned when I introduced myself early on, I came out of the classroom as a teacher and I got thrust in the world of energy management. And in making that transition, boy, I had a lot to learn. And I realized very quickly that my credibility would be eroded if I didn't know the acronyms and couldn't speak the language. And so, with that as a context, let me take us into our first set of items. Sarah, if you could move us forward here. So, what Sarah and I have done to have fun with this today is we've broken this out into 5 different categories. And the first category is HVAC, which again, it goes back to the transition I made. And what I've got here is I've just got what I would call the top 10 acronyms that if you are new or if you are learning HVAC acronyms, boy, you have to know these. These are just the real common ones in order to begin to speak the language. So I just want to run through these quickly. This idea of HVAC or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. When you talk about units in a building that deliver air, there's different categories like air handling units, or if they're physically on the roof, there are rooftop units. People use the idea of a building automation system or a BAS to refer to a electronic system that manages the facilities. You have old systems that have analog controls, and now they have DDC controls or direct digital control. Another measure that's real common when you're talking about buildings and airflow is CFM or cubic feet per minute. So that's an important thing to understand. And one of the little anecdotes I'd offer you is a cubic foot is roughly the size of a basketball. So when you read or see or hear about air flowing in and out of a building and you have 200 CFM, think about 200 basketballs flowing through a vent or through a pipe every minute. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of a visual. But ACH or air exchanges per hour is really important to make sure buildings are getting the right amount of ventilation so the air is fresh. A British thermal unit or BTU is kind of a unified unit of measure that's used in the industry to talk about how much heat is being transferred. And then the last two, RH and IAQ, this idea of wanting to make sure spaces inside of a building are comfortable. And so you want to control RH or relative humidity, and you want to make for sure that the indoor air quality is at a high enough level for the occupants to feel comfortable. And so those are the big ones. And Sarah, if you could take us to the next slide. What we've got is we've got 50 in total, and we put them in categories here. So there's a bunch. And we probably could spend the rest of the webinar today just talking about these for the newbies in the room who just haven't heard these before. But I've just highlighted a few more ones that I think are really also important to know to get the acronyms down and to be able to speak with your people. So in that first column of systems and equipment, there's a system that's a DOAS system or a DOAS or a dedicated outdoor air system. These have been around for a while, yes, but they're becoming more prominent now, particularly if you're in an organization that's electrifying your buildings, because these dedicated outdoor air systems are bringing air in to a building to offset the air that's being evacuated from the building. So it's becoming more and more common in the lingo. Many of you probably on the webinar today have DX air conditioning systems at home or direct expansion. So if you were never sure what a DX system was, it talks about the refrigerant that's expanding. Another thing with controls is what's called a PID loop. So as control systems try to manage the temperature in the buildings, these PID loops, and this lingo is used a lot by the people that program the control systems. It's a strategy for making sure that the temperature doesn't overshoot. So if a building's too cold and you try to warm it, it doesn't overshoot and become too hot, and then overshoot again and become too cold. So PID loops are a control mechanism for trying to keep buildings more comfortable. And then jump into that last column and hitting the last few for me is this idea of EER or energy efficiency ratio or coefficient of performance, COP. This also is very common lingo when people talk about how a building or how a system more specifically is going to perform. So higher numbers mean that you have higher efficiency. So if you're beginning to hear that lingo, that's what people are talking about, is how is the system performing. And then we have delta T there, more near the bottom. Delta T is this idea of change in temperature. So it's the Greek letter delta saying that the temperature is changing. And this lingo is used many times with chillers and boilers and water temperatures and how much it's changing over the course of time. And finally, the last one that I'd flag here is the one at the bottom, tab, or testing, adjusting, and balancing. What happens with most building projects is they go through a tab process, or a tab report is written to give feedback on the testing and balancing that was done as a commissioning part of a building, execution at the end. And so again, if you're hearing that for the first time, that's what the people in the room are talking about with tab. So try to run through that pretty quickly. There's a lot there to unpack. Again, please jump into the chat if you want to talk about anything more in depth, or please continue to join us as we unpack these things too over time with the upcoming webinars. But Sarah, let me hand off to you to do the next set.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm going to talk about accounting. And as Tom said, we kind of broke these into categories, and you'll see the full list on the next page. But I want to talk about this and kind of start with the financial statements and the documents that you often see when you're talking about finances. And that starts with your balance sheet. So your balance sheet is a snapshot of your assets, your liabilities, who owes you, and what you owe to other folks within your organization. And your profit and loss is your P&L is exactly that. That's more of the story over time of, okay, what are my revenues and what are we bringing in? And then what are our expenses and what's going out? And profit and loss is more when you're talking about to the board or to outside folks. Those are sort of the highlights of, okay, this is where we landed. The balance sheet is a detailed look at all of those things, including your utilities as well. And your net income, of course, being the end of day income, that is the bottom line after everything has been sort of said and done. And of course, your utility spend is going to impact that net income. Variance being the difference between some of those things. And you can have variance in line items, you can have variance between statements, but basically what variance is an alarm bell of, hey, something is off, something is different, whether it's correct and it's just the difference between what we forecasted and what actually happened, or there's a variance between statements or between sections in a statement that shouldn't be there. So we're auditing and a mistake has been made, and we're going to go ahead and fix that. Net income is really sort of the headliner of the bottom line after everything is done. And EBITDA is one of my favorites. I saved it because I like to talk about that also as sort of a bottom line. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And it's really a kind of the core operating performance of how the business is performing before financing choices, before your tax structure is involved, and before certain accounting expenses are taken into account. And finance leaders lean on this a lot because it's a way to compare apples to apples across business units, across types of businesses, even whole companies, because it strips out a lot of the really heavy variables like debt structure and tax structure and accounting depreciation schedules, things that can be really highly varied between, again, whether it's buildings or business units or facilities, things like that. It strips all that away and kind of lays bare sort of that healthy metric, which is why it's a really common metric for board reporting when a lender is considering giving money or when your business is being valued, when it's part of the valuation discussion. And certainly utilities play into EBITDA just like everything else. Utilities are typically an operating expense. So when utility costs go up or down, it can move EBITDA, which is why the finance teams, one of the reasons that finance executive teams can and should care about utility and utility spend. And the last couple here, as we get to the bottom of the list, are kind of project-based. So return on investment, right, or ROI. So for efficiency projects, that might be what are we getting back and how quickly are we getting that? ROE is one that's a little bit less common, but I think is really important to understand, and that's your return on equity. So ROI might be things that aren't strictly financial, but in terms of time savings and gain in your industry, in your market, things like that. ROE is a little bit more finance focused and ties performance back to shareholder value. So if ROI is, okay, we spent X amount of dollars on this project, when are we going to earn that money back from having implemented it? Then ROE is how effectively are we spending the organization's resources to generate profit and to reach the owners and the shareholders' goals. So they're important. One you might hear a little bit more than the other, but I like to kind of explain the difference there. And of course, KPI, we're going to talk about KPIs a lot, but this is how you keep score, right? So the KPIs are how different folks are valuing and looking at outcomes. And they could be very clear, as in financial metrics. They could be metrics of satisfaction, how happy your customers are with you. It could be, is risk higher or lower than it was before? How we're performing. There's all sorts of different KPIs, but ultimately it's how that team or that group is keeping score. And then let's get into some of the regulatory portion, which is Sarbanes-Oxley, which you'll often hear called SOX. So SOX is regulatory. It's about control, traceability, audit readiness, things like that. So SOX is also about security. So SOX Type 2, for example, is something. Energy Cap is certified as SOX Type 2, but you'll see that a lot in it. It has to do with how data is handled, how securely it's stored, where it's stored, and how easy and quick it is to trace and audit that data back. And finally, where I think utility and energy management and finance really intersect is AP and APGL, which is your accounts payable and your general ledger. So this is kind of the critical plumbing of bill processing, certainly where coding and approvals and allocations, posting to the general ledger, the process that gets billed, reviewed, and paid happens. So this is really the intersection, I think, of a lot of finance, leadership, and utilities and facilities management is right in that APGL. And again, this is the full list, and we'll be sending this out as a PDF for you after the fact. I just want to highlight a couple of different things here. So one being financial statements versus balance statements. So a balance sheet is updated monthly and then usually quarterly and then also annually. And it's a single document that is updated and used, whereas the financial statements is usually the entire package. So that could be things like profit and loss, which we talked about, or income statements, cash flow statements. There are other types of financial statements that roll up into that financial statement category, which is a little bit different than the balance sheet or the income statement, all those things below, which kind of make up that top line. And then the other thing that I just wanted to briefly touch on is the difference between AR and AP versus accounts receivable versus accounts payable. Accounts payable is what your organization owes to vendors, what you must pay out. And accounts receivable is what customers owe you, which would be coming into your organization. And again, there's lots here. If you have other questions, please drop them in the chat, and we're happy to talk about any of those. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Tom for utility billing.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you so much. That admittedly is my weakest area. I have never worked directly in accounting, but boy, I have an appreciation for knowing all those acronyms just so I can conceptually understand what's happening behind the scenes. So thank you for that. And let's jump into utility billing. And so what we have in this theme here, again, this cover slide is just talk about the top 10, then we'll get into more of the utility bills. And so going through this list here, we have kilowatt hours and in kilowatts, therms, kilogallons, all units of measure that are typical for utility bills. TOU is very common now on your electrical bill for time of use. And we're actually even seeing it begin to show up on some natural gas bills, where the idea with time of use is that you pay more for the utility during certain windows of time during the day. And so they're just trying to both collect more of your money and simultaneously discourage use during certain times for the management of the electrical grid or just the flow of gas. Other terms like power factor and load factor are specifically to your use. And let me also take a moment to put a plug in. In a couple weeks, actually 4 weeks from today, so March 11th, we're going to do another webinar that's specifically talking about utility bills and these acronyms. So I'm giving you a little flavor today, but if you'd like to learn more, if this is a weak spot of yours, please join us in a month. Please come back and hopefully I can give you more information on your utility bills. So if you can take me to the next slide, just trying to keep up the tempo here, just knowing that we're just continuing to, we have a lot to cover. I wanted to hit a couple things on this slide here. Again, all of these relate back to your utility bill, but one of the things, admittedly, that I was really confused by when I came out of that classroom and now I'm an energy manager was in that second column, MCF and then MBTU. And I'm thinking, okay, there's an M in front of both of those, so it's got to be 1,000. But if you look carefully at those acronyms, one M stands for thousand. The M at the bottom stands for million. So I'm going like, what's going on with this? Like, can't they decide whether it's an M for a million and or M for 1,000? And one of the things that I want you to realize, because it confused me for a while, is the capital M many times is a Roman numeral N, which stands for 1,000. So you might see MMBTUs, which stands for 1,000 BTUs. But just know that little difference there, having a Roman numeral or a non-Roman numeral can throw you for a loop. And so just be aware of that. I thought that was kind of a fun thing to point out. And the last thing in this slide I just want to point out to you is this idea of a power cost adjustment, a PCA. You're beginning to see this more and more on your electric bills. And what this is behind the scenes is your utility company has budgeted a certain amount of money to spend on the raw materials to burn, such as natural gas or coal, in order to make electricity. And if they've under budgeted or over budgeted, this is the line on your bill where you're supposed to see the reconciliation of that. So let's suppose they anticipated gas to be $3 per unit. It came in at $3.20. The customer is eventually paying for that. And it might not be on the immediate bill, but eventually you're going to have a power cost adjustment. So once again, if you join me in a few weeks here, we're going to unpack all of this. But the idea is there's lots of stuff to understand, and the power cost adjustment is one of those things in your bill. You should have a pretty good understanding as to what's happening. So as rates fluctuate and your bill maybe goes up and down a little bit, you can understand what's happening behind the scenes. Sarah, let me hand back to you for the next category.
So let's talk a little bit about sustainability. And when you left off with me, it was with finance. So I want to start there again with CapEx and OpEx. And capital expenditures are your big one-time investments. So those are your equipment upgrades, your retrofits, your controls projects. Those are your big expenses. OpEx are your operating ongoing expenses. So that's where your utilities land, your service contracts, your day-to-day operating costs. And this is important because a lot of your energy work is really a CapEx versus an OpEx conversation, which is, do we keep paying higher monthly bills and let this limp along? Or do we bite the bullet and invest in a one-time big investment to improve and reduce here? RFP is request for proposal. That's just the formal process to compare vendors and scope. It applies in a lot of different areas. And the point of RFP really is to bring clarity to that scope, to your success criteria, to your timeline, all those things. ESG versus EHS, environmental, social, and governance is more the reporting and disclosures part of sustainability. So that's your metrics, your targets, what your investors and your board are looking for, along with things like your reputation and risk in those spaces. Whereas EHS is much more that operational compliance and safety piece. So training, incidents, audits, things like that. And then standards and protocols. So actually, no, I skipped scope 1, 2, and 3. So scope 1 is direct fuel usage. So that's like if you're burning natural gas on site in your own boilers or your own furnace. Scope 2 is your purchased electricity. So those are your bills, your energy bills. And scope 3 is your value chain emissions and your external emissions. So for example, if you're traveling for work, the emissions from the plane that you're on would fall under scope 3. And net zero, of course, meaning the arrival at zero emissions. And there's a couple of different ways to get to net zero, which doesn't mean you're 100% running on clean electricity. That could be things like cap and trade, where you're buying credits and things like that. But the ultimate goal is to get to zero emissions. And the GHG protocol and CSRD. So these are, when you're talking about frameworks, GHG protocol is kind of the rule book that most organizations use, including in the US and worldwide as well, to define and to calculate those scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And CSRD is the European Union's biggest reporting mandate, and it tends to reach pretty far because it applies not only to companies that are based in Europe, but also that are doing business in Europe. So similar to what California is looking to do right now with SB 253 and 261. And finally, PPA, which is power purchase agreement, which is a long-term contract between you and your power provider, which is typically tied to some portion or piece of that being renewably generated. And there's benefits like price stability and risk management as well as you go along with that. And similar to Tom, I want to keep us short and sweet here. A couple of things to highlight here is ISSB, which is another global standard for sustainability. That's sort of the investor-focused piece where there's reporting. It could be mandated alongside CSRD. Because many of those companies align to kind of if CSRD is the overarching mandate, then ISSB is sort of how that gets reported and how that gets done. And then ASHRAE, which is pretty applicable again across the board, which is standards that are published for building HVAC performance, ventilation, comfort, and energy efficiency, and things like that.
Fantastic. I want to just, pause for a second and just reiterate something Sarah said, that we are planning on, when this webinar is over in the next couple of days, getting out this list of all of these acronyms to you. So if we've overwhelmed you so far in the first half hour of this webinar and your head's spinning a little bit, the plan is to try to simplify this for you, give you something that you may choose to print or just keep at the ready so that you can look at these acronyms quickly and hopefully get a context for them. With that in mind, we have one more set to go through in this category of electrification. More and more electrification is becoming part of our vernacular, and it's becoming part of what's being expected around the world. And these are some terms that are very common to that conversation. So HP stands for heat pump. So these systems have been around for years, but the idea is it's an electric system that essentially makes heat. Okay, a little different than your furnace, maybe in your home that burns natural gas to make heat. Heat pumps essentially use a refrigerant and they make heat through a mechanical process. So an EV, hopefully that one's comfortable for you, an electric vehicle. V2B, so vehicle to building. One of the things you're probably going to continue to hear more about is how cars can be used as batteries. So when you have electric vehicles and we charge them, well, you've charged the batteries. So maybe it's going to make sense to reconnect that vehicle to a building and offload that charge to operate the building. So V2B is becoming a little bit more part of the norm conversation. So a DER, a distributed energy resource, what that is it's the idea that it's typically behind the meter. It might be solar, it might be a battery, would be two examples, but it's an energy resource that can contribute adding power to a facility. Again, very common is part of the conversation now with buildings and design standards and adding these instruments to try to make things better and more resilient. So DR is demand response, this idea that we need to have a clear understanding as to how our loads are occurring in our buildings so we can respond to them. And many organizations are taking advantage of demand response programs where you're rewarded financially for lowering your demand during critical periods of time in order to help the grid survive those very severe weather days when everything's stressed. AMI, this idea, advanced metering infrastructure, critical peak pricing. Idea here with CPP is that utility companies are trying to incentivize organizations to become more aware of how they're being billed. So critical peak pricing is this idea that during certain windows of time, you're going to be charged more for your utility. Again, it has twofold. It's going to line the pockets of the utility company because they need to generate revenue. But simultaneously, it's trying to indirectly encourage organizations to become more aware of their energy use so they drive it down during those critical periods of time. NEM, or net energy metering, is this idea where you have PV typically attached to a building, and at any time during the day, typically in the midday when the sun's at the highest point and there's the most generation occurring with a solar array, that you might be netting out one way or the other, where there might be more energy being created by the sun that's going into the building. So you have a positive net, or maybe you're negative at that point. It's a cloudy day and other days where you might be negative. So it's the idea of measuring the flow of electricity in and out of a building. You've got your RECs, your renewable energy certificates, and GHG, greenhouse gases. Again, we can unpack all of these things, but just trying to make sure you have a little bit more awareness here. On this slide here, let me just kind of snag a couple of these that you might find helpful to understand. Undoubtedly, you've heard in the news this idea of CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent. So if you're trying to scan it, find this. It's in the far right column, third one down. This is the idea that CO2e, or carbon dioxide equivalent, is taking a look at the gases that are emitted, such as methane or nitrous oxide that's being put into the air, and it's trying to reduce it down to what I would call a common unit of measure. So it's trying to distill it down to something that we can universally agree and compare to look at performance for an organization or for a country or some entity. We can talk about things in a common language. And jumping down to the end of that column, BPS, so Building Performance Standard. This is conceptually the idea of local communities. It could be counties, it could be states, it could be a federal mandate of some type. In general, it's going to stay at the state level, but it's this idea that we're going to have these standards of performance that we're going to expect people to adhere to perform to certain levels. And the intention here is to try to raise the bar and get everybody more aware of the impact of their energy use on the environment. Sarah, keeping up the pace here, just know we have a few more slides to cover and knowing we've got 20 minutes left. So let me hand back to you for this next one.
So we've talked a lot about language and the different acronyms and kind of where they fall, but I think more importantly is speaking to folks in the language that matters to them. And if there's truly one takeaway that I would encourage you to bring away from this discussion, it's I cannot underestimate the value of speaking to folks in the terms, in the language, with the KPIs that matter to them, because that's really what's going to get you what you want. If you can speak in the language that they understand, then it's going to help you advance your case every single time. And those languages are different, right? So facilities and operations, generally, they're overwhelmed. They're dealing with fires. They're getting a lot of the complaints without a lot of the context. So when you're talking to them and you want to convince them that you need whatever, whether it's energy management, a tool like Energy Cap, or other things, budget, the message that you really want to highlight for them is less work, not more. So I'm not looking to add to your plate. This will help you to justify the things that you need, like equipment upgrades. And there's time savings here, not just cost, because again, facilities and ops often aren't dealing with the budget, at least not the boots on the ground guys, of kind of the budget and why that matters and where that lands. They're concerned about time savings and what they have to do in a day. So saying, well, this is going to save the company or our organization lots of money may or may not matter. So just be really clear, when you're talking about that. And executive leadership is a little bit of the opposite, right? They're looking to protect the core health, financial health, mission health of the business at a much higher level. And they're looking to save in all ways, and actually less so about time, because usually it's not their time, it's their employees' time. But especially on the cost side as well. And then certainly along with that, improving the bottom line. So you want to speak higher level and be very clear about the benefits there. Finance teams are wrangling a lot all the time. They're looking for control and security, lower risk. So if you can say, this is a tool that I need that is reasonably priced, the ROI is going to come back to us in Energy Cap's case in just over 2 years. And or actually a lot sooner, depending on if you find low-hanging fruit. We've had folks get their ROI in literally days. But if you can quantify that for them, and it's going to help you automate your work, identify areas for savings and lower risk, that's really the language that's going to be helpful for finance teams. And then there's all kinds of folks, right, who aren't directly in your organization necessarily, like investors, stakeholders, school boards, folks that you are communicating out to that have a vested interest but aren't necessarily directly working with or for you. And they are looking at stewardship of the organization. You could be one of several in their portfolio. So they want to understand that things are being correctly managed. They want credibility and clear progress to their overarching goals, which could be even higher than an executive's. So if you can communicate in those kinds of terms, then that's going to help to get buy-in from those investors and those stakeholders. And Tom, did I miss anything there that
No,
you want to add?
No, it's great, Sarah. You did great. One of the things I just wanted to make sure was clear to the attendees today is how Sarah and I, when we kicked off the webinar, we really tried to identify the different categories or departments within an organization, because we wanted you to see about how everybody kind of cares about different stuff. And now we're trying to roll it up here at the end of going through all those acronyms and getting you to see again that it matters that you can speak the same language, and it matters what you speak about if you really want to get movement or change within your organization. And so that's the connection that I just want to make sure is crystal clear. Sarah, if you could take me to the next slide, I think that's when I was going to lead. I want to tell you too, as I give you some feedback on this slide, is that I see this through the lens as a former energy manager. So I was the person in the meeting who was trying to win support for ideas. So I would do my homework, I'd meet with the facilities team, learn about the opportunities, the systems. I learned about the financial impact of making certain changes, operational changes or facility changes. And so I was in a position many times trying to make a financial case for why something made sense to the organization. So a couple key things that I want to point out here. Doing a thorough ROI analysis is so important to keeping this conversation going. And I also want to make sure that you realize too, you want to set yourself up for success. It's the third bullet in that first box there. You want to make sure that when you're doing your ROI analysis that you normalize for weather and operating hours and things that could change. Because when you finish a project and you try to measure the performance after the project, if things have changed that are unexpected, suppose the occupancy of your space has doubled, or suppose you have a very severe weather year relative to what you anticipated and budgeted for, it can completely destroy your ROI results. And the perception of the success of a project can look poor, even though there's nobody to blame. It was just another variable that was causing the impact. My point being, you need to have an ROI analysis that's thoughtful, consider a lot of variables, and blend in things such as the hard and the soft costs. Speaking of this, this is the idea that in my mind, hard cost or hard benefits would be reduced utility costs. You can plan for those, you install a new system, you're expecting to see decreased utility bills, but don't disregard the idea of soft benefits. If you are operating your systems differently and you're operating your chiller fewer hours in a week, in a month, in a year, you're operating your pumps fewer hours in a week, in a month, in a year, those things are going to last longer. Every single device has a life cycle associated with it. If you can extend it, take that pump that has a 10-year life cycle and extend it to 12 years because you're operating it fewer hours, well, that is a benefit that needs to be included in your comparison. So don't go so quick that you disregard other benefits to minimize the ROI. Let's try to realistically maximize it so people can see the benefits. And make sure too, as you're writing these analyses or providing this information to other groups within your organization, make sure you're tying it back to other business objectives and budgets. Don't do it in a vacuum. Make sure the CEO, the CFO, they see what the benefits are because they're more likely to get behind it. And maybe one last thought here that I'd offer is that it's my opinion and my experience, having worked with many organizations through the years, is that many times if you can share information that gets people on a common foundation of understanding, they also come to the same conclusion as terms of what the best next steps are. So work hard to provide the information that level sets and everybody can agree what the problems are and what the solutions are. It's a lot easier to win support for those than if you just start throwing it over the fence, assuming that people understand what you're talking about. You have to make sure that you do the homework in order to win the support for the projects. Sarah, anything to add?
No, I think that's great. And actually, I think, oh, sorry, I thought we were going to the slide after this, but no, I think you're spot on, Tom, exactly. And this again really speaking to your audience about the things that are important to them, the metrics that matter to them as well. And on that note, and we can breeze through this a little bit, but we've put together some of the metrics that matter to these different groups. So we've talked about kind of what they do and what their language is. What are their outcomes and why does that matter? So we've talked a lot about EBITDA, right, which is really common, a really common metrics and a popular one for finance folks. But again, things like cash flow and revenue growth. Executives, it's going to be a lot of those things, but it's also going to be, in addition to the financial metrics, it's going to be things like satisfaction of our customers, of our stakeholders, our board, our school board, the oversight folks as well. So Tom, kind of to your point about the mix of hard and soft. Are there any ones that you want to point out in particular for energy or ops?
Not necessarily. I love this list. What I would say my maybe insight that I'd offer to people with this is I think if you can rally a group of people to come together to define some KPIs for your organization, what you need to do is have some from each of these categories. And what I think is also important is you might, as a group, be tracking KPIs for your organization. Some of them might be public. You might share them in some way in newsletters or some appropriate way for your organization, and some might not be public. But I think there's a benefit for having KPIs from every layer in your organization because it helps to establish support and momentum for your organization. And so don't focus all your KPIs in one category. It can't always just be about money or just about energy. It needs to be about many variables. And that's really important to winning that support from others.
I think that's a really good point that you just made, that when you're building your case, it's not just about who am I communicating out to, but how are we measuring success? And to your point, if it's strictly financial or strictly about, a vague metrics of satisfaction or things like that, you're missing key folks and key components. So bringing them together. And of course, as you do things, you're going to get objections, right? And we pulled together kind of some of the most common ones that you're going to see. And the biggest one often that we hear is, look, we'd love to do it. We don't have the budget. And functionally, what that means is, yeah, your budget is tight for capital expenditures. You might not have it, but also when you kind of dig down a little bit deeper, what it means is I'm not confident in the ROI case that you're bringing to me. I'm not confident in the value that you're bringing, which means you want to adjust a little bit how you're speaking. So get specific, right, with those people's KPIs in the language that they want, whether it's financial impact or the timing, or you know what, let's say yes to this next quarter, things like that. Another big one, and again, like if I could choose some takeaways from this session, show the cost of doing nothing. So there is a cost of not making change, of deciding, you know what, we're not going to do this now. Quantify that and say, look, we're going to pay this either way. And sometimes the easiest and quickest way to pay is with money. So sometimes you suck it up, you do the thing that you have to do, because rather than a slow bleeding drip that's going to amount to a much higher amount, you just do the thing, you get the budget in place, and over time, you actually save yourself a substantial amount of money. So that's a big one. And then pilot to scale as well when possible. Maybe you can start small and then scale as you go, as you prove successes, because again, it goes back to lack of confidence in that ROI. And then Tom, anything to add for that
Yeah,
or for the other two as
yeah,
well?
yeah. I would jump in on the like. I don't see the benefits like that objection. And then one of the bullets we have down there is lead with the data. I would maybe say it a little bit different way is if people don't see the benefits, it means that you're tracking the wrong data. That if you understand the problem that you're trying to solve and you're building an approach, you're building a philosophy, you're building a team to solve those problems, you have to collect the data so people can see the progress that you're measuring. So I would say if that is the objective, then circle back, look at the data. Is there different data you can collect so that you can tell a story that will win the support in order for people to get behind the effort? And so, Sarah, as we've said a couple of times, it's like there's so much to unpack here, and hopefully we're giving people some things to think about as they do this. Sarah, let me start with this one, and then I'd love your contribution as well. But what we got on this slide is this idea: if you are trying to develop a report, you're communicating with your executives, and it could be an executive for the company, a CEO. It could be the executive who leads your finance team or your facilities team. What Sarah and I have listed here are 7 different parts of a report that we think should be there to tell the story. Or the way it's titled off to the side here, effective communication outline. If you don't know where to start and you're just looking for how do I develop a document to communicate all those important elements to someone, these are the things that Sarah and I would offer to you. You need to definitely have an executive summary where you're describing what the opportunities are, the benefits, some of the challenges. Number 2, the current challenges. Why is it inefficient? How is it hurting our organization? You got to propose a solution. So introduce products, ideas, strategies. Make sure that they're clear, that it's not vague, it's not conceptual. It's got to be more literal. Like, how can we get this done in order to be successful? Make sure you're talking the money part, so outline the savings, the ROI. Go through those variables and tell the story of what you anticipate with graphs and charts and data, because most people can follow that. They want to see that in order to support it. Talk about how it's going to get done. Is it a quick change? What are the phases, the training, the support? What other things that might not come top of mind that need to be considered in order for this to be successful? So the benefits to the facilities, again, want to circle back to this idea of the soft things, the things that aren't obvious. Rack your brain, list them out, because all of those things matter. And the more you can list genuinely and literally, like the things that are going to benefit, then identify them, share them so that you can get that support. And finally, the last thing that we'd suggest you do is make sure you don't disregard risks or mitigation. So address the concerns, anticipate where people's resistance might be, and proactively address it so that it doesn't become a talking point in a meeting. People can see what you've got and they can see how you're planning to address it. Sarah, what do you think? Any other ideas with that?
I think you're spot on, Tom. And the only thing I would add is all of the groups that we've been talking about, executives, finance, facilities, and energy, who are often the folks who are experiencing the current challenges and experiencing the pain and need the proposed solution, all of them are represented here in this outline, which of course should be customized and tweaked for what you want it to be. But we've really tried from start to finish to, in different areas, represent all of those folks. And that's ultimately what your strategy should do. It should address all of the stakeholders, all of the individuals and the teams that you need buy-in from, you need budget from, or you need participation from. Bake that into your communication and how you're speaking to them.
Yep. And so we are at the last slide here. And what we want to do is culminate with this idea of you have to communicate, right? That's been a common thread. We haven't said it. We've implied it, we've said it a few times, but at the end of the day, it's about good, clear communication, having knowledge of the acronyms and the lingo and speaking everybody's language. And I think a great way to communicate that across your teams is with the dashboard. So it's having those KPIs or having those metrics in one common place, because people have to see it. People have to understand it. They have to buy into it. And people are curious. If people are aware of initiatives at an organization, generally speaking, people will stay tuned into it. So it's got to be clean. It's got to be simple. It's got to be colorful. And I think you're going to see more progress than if this is happening behind the scenes where it's not communicated so clearly to people. So use dashboards, use technology and use dashboards. In this case here, it's a nice energy cap dashboard that would communicate information across teams. Sarah, before we ask the question, anything to add to that dashboard comment, or are we ready to find out what we've missed?
Yeah, to your point you made a really good point too about charts and graphs in general and visuals. A picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say. Energy Cap has, I do think, some truly exceptional capabilities for dashboards. They can be shared publicly, privately, anywhere, any way that you need them. But basically, anywhere that you can literally or figuratively not use 1,000 words and show it much simpler, do that, because again, that's going to be effective and it's going to help to get that point across. So Mads, with that, we have a couple of minutes for questions. So did we miss anything? What were we, while Tom and I were in Chatland, what was going on? And do we have questions and anything we can help folks who've tuned in for?
So right now, I do not see any questions, but if anyone has any that they want to ask now, you can ask them with the Q&A tool in the chat. You can even ask them anonymously in the Q&A if you don't want to show your name. But yeah, let us know.
I just thought of another fun thing maybe we should add is just being the older guy in the team. I'm thinking that maybe I need a list of acronyms for all the young people, all these texting acronyms and stuff like that, so I can understand what's being said around me. So maybe if there's other people on the webinar who are in my position in life, it's like trying to keep up with young people is a challenge at times too.
OMG, Tom, what would they be?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
LOL is another one.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
LOL, yeah.
Those I understand.
We had so much fun with the alphabet soup of all of this, I have to say.
Yes.
Oh wow, TLA, three-letter acronym. I didn't even think about that one.
Great.
Yep.
And I did link that March webinar, Tom, in the chat. So some people are really looking forward to that as well.
Awesome. Yeah. I do we have a sense of when we can do the turnaround and get this list out to people the way we have promised, where we want to try to give them a takeaway, a one pager or a multi-pager to print this out? Do we have a
Yeah.
sense of that? Are we a day or two away from that?
Yeah, I would say tomorrow you guys will get the recording and the list. I think it's a good estimate. We can get it to
Okay. Love it. Well, as
I'm
we
loving
start,
all these acronyms.
yeah, yeah, me too.
you. This is great.
I know, right?
Okay. If you know, you know. Well, Matt, I don't know that we have too many questions from folks, which is just fine. So I we can probably wrap it up unless there's oh my gosh, David, that's a really good one. Can we do all of our webinars this way and just end with the last instead of Q&A, the last 10 minutes are just fun things.
Yes.
This has been really great. Tom, you and I are learning acronyms.
Yes, I like how Michelle just busted out the ta for now. Is that
Oh
a
my
Winnie the
gosh.
Pooh? Which who is that? I'm trying to remember the TTFN. I think is that Winnie the Pooh? Somebody's got to help me out here. I think that might be Winnie
I
the
love
Pooh.
it.
That's awesome.
Tigger, Tigger.
Tigger! It's Tigger.
Okay, well, I'm going to begin to sign off. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hopefully, you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I
thanks
enjoyed it,
all.
and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Yes.
Talk to you soon.
Everybody.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.